from the Asian Community Development Council. This is Family in Focus, Mondays at 12 noon on PHLV Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Family in Focus. Great to have you here with us here on the show every Monday, talking about the conversation surrounding the Asian American Pacific Islander experience. But today, we're also bringing in the African American, the Black experience into the conversation as well, because, as you know, this is Black History Month. We're capping it off almost end of the month. We want to make sure we bring this topic up because it's so important, especially the historical connections, the shared experiences between our two groups. And I think we have some great perspectives today with our two guests that we have here in the house today. We have Brandon Manning. He's the assistant professor of Black literature and culture at Texas Christian University. Thank you so much, Brandon, for being here with us today. And we have our guest who's been on this show before, Mark Padungpat, who is the director of Asian and Asian American Studies program at UNLV. He's representing the Thai American community as I am here in Las Vegas. He's teaching at UNLV. I'm teaching there as well. And also, Brandon was a former UNLV professor as well, but now he's based in Fort Worth area of Texas. So thank you to all of you for being part of this conversation today. Mark, I'm going to start with you. You know, we're talking, this show, as you know, about the Asian American experience, but when it comes to Black History Month, talk to us about why it's so important, especially from our perspectives, to really share this and celebrate Black History Month from the Asian American experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for one, there's a lot of conversation around, our shared experiences, our histories of struggle, and I think there's just my commitment to Black history and Black study is just that there's just been this long history of struggle for a better world, right? And I think that my entry into Asian American history and as an Asian American studies scholar and professor came through Black history and Black study. And what I learned from that was that, Black thinkers and leaders and activists have always had the broadest vision for societal change, right? And I think I was drawn to that vision and that struggle and how that could apply and how we could think about that in relationship to our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. And so in many ways, I think it's important because if we look at Black history and Black struggle, again, this very long history, right? Not just the civil rights struggle in the 1960s, but this very long history and vision, I think we can learn a lot about justice and freedom and liberation going forward for Asian Americans, but really for all groups.
Yeah, and I think it's especially kind of poignant right now, just with our, what's happening around the world, especially, and here in the U.S. especially. We see the injustices, especially with COVID, what happened with the Asian American communities, the discrimination and all the issues we've been dealing with. Of course, the African American community have been dealing that for many, many, many years, and so have we. But I think this kind of really played out why, solidarity matters, right? When it comes to both of our groups kind of stepping up and being there for each other. And I think it's so special because we're bringing Brandon into the conversation here because both of you are not just both professors, educators, you're also friends. And, you met here at UNLV. And Brandon, thank you so much for being with us. And talk to us a little bit about your relationship with Mark, because you met here in Las Vegas, right? When you first came here to work at UNLV.
Yeah, no, it was actually... my relationship with Mark has been transformative. One of the things that I write about in the acknowledgments of my book is, in many ways, my trajectory, a lot of the long nights where I was writing and tooling and figuring out kind of what it is that I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. Mark was oftentimes the first person I would ask a question to, or would sometimes be even in the same space. I remember very early on, he and I would write at Starbucks off of Eastern. It was 24 hours, and we would just burn the night oil, so to speak, in that space. Mark, when we got to Vegas, Mark, was the friend that I didn't know that I needed at the time. And so it's been extremely transformative, both career, professionally, but also personally. He is a little bit too late of what would have been like a godparent, and I was happy to be present in his like nuptial ceremony and take part in the festivities, and so we became very close friends very quickly. Yeah.
I love that. And you were talking about your book, and I think you have a copy there with you, right? It's called
Yes.
Played Out, which just came out not too long ago. And the reason that I even
Yep.
got this into the conversation and thought about this episode was because I saw a post that Mark had put up on social media talking about your book and said, hey, support my friend. He just came out with this book. I mean, you weren't surprised that he was one of the first people just kind of getting the word out there.
Yeah, no, not at all. In part because we were running mates. He kind of led the way, showed me what the process looked like, showed me how to interact with the kind of publishing space. I think I was there when he was trying to tool and tweak titles for his book. And so we kind of always been there. I saw the cover art, and he would go over a few of his arguments and how he was engaging certain topics. And so, no, it wasn't a surprise at all. And that kind of always has been us. Yeah, it's always been us.
And tell people a little bit about this book. It's called Played Out. And, Black History Month, of course, this is the time when we really want to celebrate, the art, the contributions that the African American community is bringing up in our society. And obviously, books are among those. So talk to a little bit about Played Out. What's the book about, and what message do you want to get out there?
Yeah, so Played Out is a book about thinking about how Black men are routinely expected to be funny and humorous in our society. And then when they are funny and humorous, how do they use that humor to kind of make meaning of the world around them? How do they use it as a mode of self-expression, as a way to present themselves kind of emotionally, affectively to the world around them? And then how are they able to kind of maybe retool some of our underlying assumptions around Blackness, around masculinity, around this contemporary moment that we're in. So I've got chapters on Dave Chappelle, Key and Peele, a few novelists in there as well. But yeah, it's really about thinking about how Black men in this contemporary and historically leading up to this moment have kind of tooled and retooled and used humor to kind of make meaning of the world around them.
Why do you think this book and the themes and the messages around it is so important to what we're experiencing right now? Maybe not just in the African American community, but just in our society in general.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why it's really important is because humor is so often used as a way to diffuse and a way to kind of, like you said, bridge those communities and solidarity and have be coalition building kind of spaces. But it's also can be used and oftentimes is used, weaponized and is used very divisively, right? Or as a way to dismiss. And so I think one of the things that even as, I'm looking at my son and they're on TikTok and all these other things, right? Some of the humor and the way that it circulates in those spaces, right? It's really interesting to think about how it operates, how we're meant to either laugh or engage a particular topic, and what is it telling us how we should read kind of the world around us. And so I think that's why it's really important in this contemporary moment.
And let me bring Mark into the picture, because Mark, I know you're one of Brandon's biggest cheerleaders and biggest fans. When you heard about him kind of working on this book and the ideas, what was your first reaction? What were you thinking? Because you're an author yourself, and your book talked about this bridging cultures through food with the Thai community and the Thai cultures around the world. But when you heard about Brandon, what was your first reaction as a friend and as a fellow author?
Yeah, I mean, I think the probably the most important thing is that Brandon is, one of the smartest people I've ever met, right? And I think every conversation that I had, early on and continue to have with Brandon, it's not just smart in the sense that he just knows stuff, but it's how he interprets stuff, right? How he interprets issues and events. And every conversation we had, I always felt like I left with a different interpretation or a different frame to understanding a particular issue. And I'm his biggest cheerleader because I think that's a gift for all of us, right? That Brandon's mind is a gift to all of us. And so anybody who engages with his book is going to dive into Blackness and masculinity and humor, but also you're going to learn something new about how to think about those things and how to think about how they're related. And, I think just even as Brandon said, his work is focused on, humor and comedy. as a way to bring people together. And I think that that was something that underlying both of our work, we sort of shared, because my work was specifically related to and focused on Thai food, but it was also thinking about how food is often used as this thing that can help bring people together.
No,
right?
I love it.
Break bread, like that. We can solve racism if we sit down and break bread, right?
And that is the shared experience, right? Especially with the African American community as well. Maybe Brandon can talk a little bit about that. You know, when we talk about food, and by the way, if you're not familiar, we do have the jacket of Mark's book that came out a few years ago now, Flavors of Empire, Food and the Making of Thai America. And, just kind of delving in beyond the food itself, but just the cultures as well. And I know that Brandon, aside from your own book, you also have Brandon's of Mark's book with you as well, right there in your in your personal library, right next to each other. Talk to us about that, because with Asian Americans, especially when we talk about our experiences, food is such a big part. I'm sure that's part of the African American community as well, right?
Oh, definitely. Yes. And it was so wonderful to kind of be in the Las Vegas space, to be able to engage all of these new cuisines and restaurants that I was really just kind of opening up my palate to. My son, for a long time, was on a predominantly Asian American basketball team. And we would go out and there were a number of Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders on the team. And I don't know, my worldview opened up in a number of different ways, in part because of, one, our close proximity, but also in terms of these foodways. And then you're absolutely right. Food is really big in my house. It's really big culturally. My wife and I are both from the South. And I feel like embedded in the food, and soul food specifically, is its own kind of history and historicity about the Black experience, as we've been talking about it, right? About struggle and about triumph. And that's all kind of embedded in the flavor profiles and food choices. Yeah.
No, it's so great. And I love the relationships that both of you have, and the friendships that you had over the years. I know we have some pictures that we want to share from your days back in UNLV and in Las Vegas together, I don't think we talk about this enough. Just kind of, what sometimes you don't think about people that you're friends with and you work with, that, the experiences that we shared, how different we are, but also how similar, right? So, Mark, talk a little bit about that, because do you stop and think, especially with the field that you're in, you're talking about Asian American studies, but you're also talking about this gender, ethnic, this, how we're all interrelated, right? And talk to me about how you convey that to your students that you're teaching now, growing up in this area where social media is everything, how they're putting everything out there, but are really making that connection that you have had with Brandon. I mean, what's going on out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a big question, right? Because there's sort of different ways to answer it, but the one that comes to mind is just, in terms of content delivery, right? So like the way that I like to introduce issues related to Asian Americans is that there are these bigger issues, say, white supremacy or land dispossession, housing, that affect many communities. And I think allowing my students to see how it affects Asian Americans, that it's not just exclusive to Asian Americans. And so as an educator, my goal is to try to focus on these kind of larger issues as a way to build solidarity, as opposed to just saying, this is what Asian Americans experience, this is what we go through, and people need to pay attention to us and us only. I think that's important, right. But I also think that it's always going to be about solidarity and building stronger relationships across different groups. That's sort of always been my commitment. And yeah.
I love that. And I know, I'm sure, Brandon, you come from a similar perspective. How has that changed, especially with your partnership and friendship with Mark? And how has that kind of leaked into how you teach and what you put out there, through your books or in other platforms?
Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about doing the work that I think both Mark and I do is that whenever we're giving a talk, there's almost certainly going to be somebody in the audience that asks, so how do you fix it, right? As if there's some kind of like cure-all and simple, like quick fix for it. But really, one of the big ways to do that is through coalition building and solidarity, right? And so I think, you know, my friendship with Mark has made sure that in my own teaching and through my own thinking that there's a way that I focus and make sure that centering those kind of resistant voices and lives and issues of solidarity are kind of at the forefront, because it was really like, I don't know, like I've shared so many memorable experiences with Mark that that it's just shown me how close even our very distant lives were, how similar they were, right? I remember a moment, if you'll allow me real quick. We went to LA and I got a chance to meet Mark's parents, and they let me stay in his home. And it was in that moment that I realized that his dad and Mark are great golfers, right? And have this long kind of history with golf. And Mark tells this wonderful story about the time that he got a chance to kind of see Tiger Woods on the thing. And I immediately am transported back to when I'm growing up watching Tiger Woods with a similar set of investments but from a maybe a slightly unique, different kind of perspective, rooting Tiger Woods on and hoping that he, you know, hits a long putt for eagle or what have you. And so there's all of these kind of overlapping shared experiences that we have together, but also differently, that I think that if you can get students to realize that, it'll help to bridge some of the ways that our world around us is increasingly trying to isolate.
Yeah, and the Tiger Woods example is really interesting because I didn't think about, you know, just the fact, of course, I know he's part African-American and part Thai. You know, his mom is Thai and his dad is African-American. And so, Mark, is that kind of like, you know, was he kind of like your golf idol, you know, like, so?
Yeah, no, I'm glad, you know, Brandon brought that up because I think it was, I mean, he was my idol, and then he started saying stuff, and he started talking about his identity, and I could sort of, and I'm speaking about Tiger, the more public he became about his multiracial identity, I think that the less of a fan I was, I guess I could say that. But I think symbolically, right, what Brandon is saying is spot on, that and part of that story that Brandon is sharing is, you know, we went to, my dad and I were able to go to a golf tournament because I think it was the Nissan Open, and a lot of my family were mechanics for Nissan, and so we got tickets. And this was, you know, in 2000 when Tiger was at the height of his career, and the whole time my dad and I, mostly my dad, were following Tiger and just saying things in Thai. Right? It's like, hey, do you want to eat this? Do you want to eat, you know, do you want, you know, pataiu? Do you want, like, it's just naming these things. And Tiger would like laugh and respond. And then after the round, you know, we were waiting for him, and he came right up to us. And I was like, you know, Sawadee Krap, Tiger. And he, you know, he said Sawadee Krap, signed my ticket and left. And I was the only person he interacted with. Me and my dad were the only people he interacted with. And so it's such a great memory. But I think symbolically, right, Tiger being, you know, some this figurative and symbolic common ground between Brandon and I think is kind of apropos, and the fact that we both disagree with or take issue with how Tiger identifies himself also speaks to, I think, Brandon and I's me and Brandon's friendship.
And Mark, by the way, is a much better golfer than I am. Okay, so I don't want to even make it seemed like I'm on the same level as he is.
I love that. I love there's so many layers of that. And it's just so interesting now, right? Just because, you know, so many people, especially in the limelight, are multiracial. You know, either they're part Asian and part white, or African-American, part Asian. And I'm sure that's a good thing, right? I mean, you see that out there. I know not everyone kind of identify that way or bring it out to the forefront, but do you feel like, Brandon, is that something that we should kind of talk more about, just in terms of how we're such a blend of cultures and so many different backgrounds? How can we amplify that and make that something really kind of positive, you know, for what we're putting out there?
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think you're absolutely right that there is this kind of shared and increasing biraciality, multiracial kind of spectrum. And I think one of the key factors is to make sure that as we're moving forward, it doesn't necessarily mean that we erase any of those kind of specific cultural differences, but instead lift them up and celebrate them, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, one of the things that, as we're talking about Tiger, that began to be a little frustrating was how he would potentially like position himself, right? And try and, for lack of better words, like obfuscate or kind of tone down certain cultural kind of spaces or moments, as opposed to embracing them, right? And so I think you're absolutely right that for a number of people, this is their kind of lived experience, and a unique experience, right? One that has oftentimes its own kind of interactions and engagements with the world, but that it doesn't necessarily have to be a either or. It can be and we can celebrate everybody and everything that kind of adds to somebody's identity.
No, and I agree. And I think, the more that I kind of study and look at, racial cultures and being an educator myself now, what I think about is there's so much, especially with the whole discriminations and stuff out there, that we're all not, especially as Asian Americans, not a monolith, right? Sometimes they think, oh, we're all Chinese or we're all from China, or, and we're all so many different kinds of Asians. And Mark, I want you to speak to that a little bit. I mean, it's so important, right? I think in a way to really kind of, that there are differences, even though we can be very similar in many of our cultures, but we need to kind of talk about those differences that we have as well. We all come from different places.
Yeah, I mean, and those differences are incredibly complex, right? So, I mean, this gets brought up all the time that like the AAPI community, that AAPI, shouldn't even be combined, right? That's one part of that conversation. And also, even within this category of Asian American, we're talking about different ethnic groups,
right?
Not just different communities that represent different countries around the world, but that like even within those nations, there are different regions and different groups of people. And so there really is no monolith. But I think the reason why we need to bring that up is because of this kind of homogenizing and approach to Asian American communities that say that, we sort of think the same, we act the same. And I think that's always, a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is why this kind of conversation, especially bringing you and bringing Brandon into picture, because, it's seeing someone not just from the Asian American experience, but Brandon coming from your African American experience. I'm sure there's, once you met Mark and got to know his family and got to know his colleagues, I'm sure there was a kind of a change of perspective there, right? At some level from you.
Oh, definitely. And moving, I think, west more broadly, where there is this kind of more diverse kind of landscape was extremely important for my own development and recognizing, right, because I'm from the South, largely spent most of my childhood in the South and then gone to grad school in the North. In the way that, especially the South kind of imagines itself, it's always in opposition in this kind of binary North and South, right? And so the West was this kind of enigma for me. And when we moved out there, it was great to kind of see, I think, in many ways, what America could be, right? The promises that it wants to have at the center of it, and the way that you kind of see that embedded in the various communities and how they're all interacting. And I think Vegas is a perfect kind of example of what that looks like.
Yeah,
and I think just to add to that too, right? I think it's really important, and I think it's key that, even though we're teasing out these differences, as Brandon is highlighting, right, that like my friendship with Brandon, of course I see Brandon as a sort of a member of the Black community in all of its kind of complicatedness, right, and messiness, as with all communities. But we also don't want to run the risk of just saying like everybody is different and everybody is unique, because everybody is seen as a member of a group, and the outcomes, whether it's life expectancy or health or educational, like that category still matters, even though we know from below that everybody is an individual, everybody is different, no one can represent the entire community. But the fact that people do see the entire community as an entire community still matters, that still plays a part in Brandon's life, right? So even though I see Brandon as an individual, I also see Brandon as a Black man, right? And I know and I have a sense of what that means in the United States, even if I haven't experienced it personally.
Yeah, and I think, and both you, what I've been hearing from both of you, Brandon and Mark, and the relationship that you form and what came out of it, I think just kind of underlines that we need these kind of authentic relationships and conversations to build that real empathy, right? And I think that's what we need more than ever, is that empathy for what we see as the others, other groups, other people that we may not have as much experiences with, and what they're going through. And I think what you both are doing, especially through your work and your books, are just kind of putting that out there and creating that conversation so that we can really build on that, right? Brandon, is that kind of how you see this as well?
Definitely. And one of the early moments that I think Mark and I shared once I got to Vegas was a kind of protest where we marched up the strip. I think after Mike Brown's death. Mm-hmm. That checks out. Mike Brown's death. And so it's those moments of solidarity, right? It's a chance for me to get a chance to see kind of over the course of a number of years, all that Mark is, what his politics are, how he is supporting me and Black folks, like individually, but also broadly, right. And then doing the same. And so I don't know, it's just, one of the things that I think the pandemic has showed me is that we all kind of need to make sure that we show up. Mm-hmm. And as much as it's important, especially in this moment where we're thinking about mental health, that we show up for ourselves and kind of whole and well. It's also important that we don't become so insular that we don't show up for each other, right? And I think Mark and I's friendship is just a testament to what showing up for each other looks like.
Right. And Mark, and coming from you, I mean, what's next? I mean, what do you see? I mean, obviously still so many challenges out there for all of us, in so many ways, but I think, we got to start somewhere. And I think this is a good conversation to do that.
Yeah. No, I think everything that Brandon said, right? I think thinking about how we can show up for each other, thinking about the differences, but also the commonalities, right? And where, but I guess by commonalities, I just mean do we have a shared vision of what the future can look like? And how do we work together across various lines, not erasing various lines, but how do we work together across various lines to make this a more, just society? Yeah,
no, I agree. And I think, both of you, just the work that you do and then what you're putting out there, especially in your world of education, and both your books, I'm sure will help in that process. So thank you so much, Brandon Manning, Assistant Professor of Black Literature and Culture at Texas Christian University, formerly of UNLV right here in Las Vegas, and also Mark Padung-Pad, who is now the chair, actually, of your department there, currently at UNLV, and also Director of Asian and Asian American Studies at UNLV. Brandon's book is called Played Out, The Race Man in 21st Century Satire, so check that out. Should be out there. And also Mark's book, Flavors of Empire, Food and the Making of Thai America. Great to have both of you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for trying.
Thank you, Brandon and Mark, and thank you, everybody, for listening and for watching today's episode of Family in Focus, and we'll see you again next week.